Hey guys, so with my biggest ranking video getting a decent amount of views, I figured I should probably do another one since, hey, you guys seem to enjoy that a lot. And thankfully someone on my Don Bluth video had the right idea, as I got this particular comment. Do Jim Henson next. Aha, joke's on you, Molar D. Ardula. I think that's pronouncing right. Cause I was planning to do a Jim Henson video anyway, so
you're getting your wishes, so sit down!
So without further ado,
ladies and gentlemen, it's the Muppet Show!
If there's one creator that has truly been a poster child for media that's unique and out there from everything else, it's without a doubt Jim Henson. Or more accurately, Jim Henson and his cast of lovable characters known as the Muppets. To say these characters and a lot of other projects from Henson and his team weren't a huge part of my life is an understatement. Henson's work has impacted me and so many others because there hasn't been a cast of characters that are as crazy and weird yet also as genuine as the Muppets are. They have captured the intentions of people who feel like they are too different for this world and kind of gave them a voice in a way. This is mostly due to the fact that Jim Henson has made a decent amount of movies that features these characters with their own unique story. And today we're going to talk about the many movies that Jim Henson has been a part of in some capacity. That's right, we're not only going to be ranking the Muppet movies, but we're also going to be talking about a few other Jim Henson related projects as well. The requirements are they have to be a theatrically released film that is a project fully from the Jim Henson team. Whether it be directed by Jim Henson, has his characters, or has some variation of Muppets, we're going to rank the movies that help us meet the Muppets. So sit back, relax, and watch out for some Muppet mayhem, as these are the theatrical films relating to Jim Henson, ranked from worst to best. Let's get started.
Earl, that's for kids.
Yeah, you'd think that because they're puppets. So the show seems to have a children's aesthetic.
Well, it wouldn't be a proper ranking video without discussing a film that's considered less than favorable on the list. So, what could be that one for the topic of Jim Henson? There we go. Now, some may say that Happy Time Murders shouldn't be included on this list. Not because of the quality, but it's a project that came out long after Jim's death and doesn't include any of his own iconic characters. However, it is still technically a Henson production with a lot of puppetry, and the film is directed by his own son, Brian Henson. Therefore, I'm including it on here to discuss a little bit about it, even though there's kind of a reason why this movie is on the bottom of this list. The Happy Time Murders had quite a production history, dating all the way back to 2008, with this movie initially being a darker kind of Muppet movie, with the setup being a full-on film noir style. But as years passed, the film maintained the idea that it was going to be an R-rated movie, but rather than a more interesting mature route, this goes more in the realm of being a comedy, with the main appeal being it's puppets doing not so child-friendly things. For many, it does come across as being edgy and inappropriate for the sake of it, rather than it being a genuinely interesting story. And unfortunately, Happy Time Murders doesn't have a lot to really elevate it from it being a standard adult comedy. The film looks a little bit flat from a cinematography standpoint, being shot like most other comedies, which makes me wish it did go for a more cinematic noir style. That not only gives it a better identity, but also more personality to it, being more of a parody movie of some sorts. Even taking the noir element out of it, its humor is still rather cheap, with a lot of basic kind of jokes we've seen in other adult puppet related movies. And when it doesn't focus on the puppets, we have to see Melissa McCarthy do what else? Her basic unfunny slapstick routine. However, even though this movie is the weakest one on the list by far, I can't really say it deserves the hating. gets. I've seen plenty of reviews that helm this as an insult to Jim Henson's legacy, and watching the movie again, I think it's honestly far from that. While it's not really that funny of a movie, and it does rely on shock value that feels kinda tame, most of the aspect of this movie that does work does come from the puppeteering. The best moments in the entire movie are the ones where we get to see them take advantage of them being puppets, with a decent amount of jokes that embrace how ridiculous this all is. But in a way where it all feels like it's all in good fun. When you see a puppet die in this movie, and it's just a bunch of stuffing instead of blood and guts, you can tell that the makers of this movies are much in love with the medium of puppetry as they are making fun of it. The puppeteers in this movie bring a lot of personality to this film, with each actor giving some fun performance, particularly from Bill Beretta, who really makes Phil Phillips an enjoyable protagonist that's fitting for this kind of cop story, with some great delivery of lines too.
I'm in the FBI. Oh yeah, what's that stand for? Big idiot?
That, and also, to its credit, this movie also utilized some really good puppet effects as well that does elevate this movie a little bit. I get that the effects don't always save a movie, but unlike other movies where the effects technique they use do not add to the story at all, the puppetry effects actually do add to the world building of this movie. With all the use of full body puppets living alongside humans, there was at least a decent effort making this world authentic and believable. I think that all comes thanks to the crew, who honestly look like they had a blast making this movie, especially during the credits, which is easily the best part of the movie. So it's not a mean-spirited mess like some people claim, though it's still muddled in its story that's a basic cop movie that's we've seen done better in a lot of other movies. They do make it a bit interesting with some twists and turns that actually kind of work, but they also could have concluded things a bit differently to where it's not all rushed. Like, the movie ends and it doesn't feel like much was accomplished, leading the film in general to be a tad disappointing. It's not a disaster of a movie. Like I said, there are funny moments that did genuinely get a laugh out of me, and the effort is still there thanks to a lot of the fun talent, but it does feel underwhelming, especially for the movie it could have been. For a movie from the son of Jim Henson that's an adult puppet movie, you can kinda expect a bit better, as there's certainly better projects with puppets that are for adults, along with being better movies that do this kind of cop movie trope. If you are a die-hard puppet fan, and this movie does make you curious, it's not a complete waste of time, though it doesn't come highly recommended either. But hey, it could have been worse. It could have starred Jeff Dunham.
Elmo knows where you live!
Going from the most adult film on our list to possibly the most kid-friendly and somewhat innocent one, The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland is the second major Sesame Street movie from the Henson Company. And this is a film that's kind of hard to review because I'm going to sound like someone I hate here. It is made for kids, like little kids. Something that me and many other people who are critical of media get a ton of flack for is when we talk negatively on a project that has a strong kid market or animated, and the response to those criticisms is, oh, this movie wasn't made for you. You can't hate it because they made the movie for kids, which is frustrating, since it feels like a horrible excuse to not put any effort into a movie because kids will like it because they're dumb, and as a way to exempt any legit criticism a movie may face. Despite that though, it's somewhat hard not to have that mentality a little bit when talking about a movie about Elmo. It's one thing to say that about a movie that's arguably made more so for general audiences, like kids and adults, but it's also another thing to be really cynical on something that was literally made for 5-year-olds. And for what it is, Elmo in Grouchland is fine. Really, your enjoyment of this movie is really gonna be fixated on not just age, but also on how big of a Sesame Street fan you are and how much of a fan you are of Elmo. This movie not only came out during this weird time where movies based on little kid properties were being made, but also during the height of Elmo's popularity as the face of Sesame Street, even though Big Bird is the superior Sesame Street protagonist, but we'll get to him later. Which, the overexposure of Elmo at the time could draw some people off from this movie. And one legit criticism I have is that Elmo Elmo and his whole story isn't that interesting. At least not one to fill up a film. His whole purpose to go in the Grouchland is to get his blanket. Yeah, not a friend in trouble or chosen one, just a blanket. I know it's for a younger audience, but you can do a little bit better than just that. Plus, sometimes Elmo could come across as arguably annoying. They make him a little bit of a brat, only caring about his blanket. And yeah, it is a part of his character arc where he has to learn to share, but you can do that without making the character, well, annoying. It's better than nothing though, and to this movie's credit, we do see quite a bit of the charm and creativity that I've always loved from Sesame Street. The world of Grouchland is pretty neat, some of the songs are passable, and this movie does have a few funny bits here and there that actually get a genuine laugh.
Sir, can you please help Elmo get his blanket back?
I'd love to, but I don't speak English.
The highlight of the humor goes to Ernie and Bert, who are arguably the best Sesame Street characters alongside Cookie Monster and Grover, and it's funny to see them make jokes about the film too.
Who'd want to see a movie with a sad ending, Bert?
Titanic.
What?
Titanic had a sad ending.
Plus, honestly, as a longtime fan of these characters, it's really great to see all of these awesome Sesame Street characters all together in one big cinematic adventure, no matter how brief their appearance was here. Sesame Street and the Muppets in general are some of the first things I've ever truly became attached to, and watching this again, this brought back some memories of seeing them in theaters and being kinda hyped. Granted, I was maybe one of the 10 people who contributed to this movie's box office, but it doesn't matter. It's hard to really hate a movie with some effort put into it that has Ernie and Bert. There are better Sesame Street projects, trust me, we'll get to there, but for little kids and Sesame Street enthusiasts, Elmo and Grouchland serves its purpose very well. You can definitely do a lot worse with these kind of kids movies. Not much else to say except Elmo and Grouchland is a cute one. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, on to the next movie.
Good evening, Rorschach.
Dr. Manhattan, you know why I'm here.
Muppets Take Manhattan is kind of the weakest Muppet movie. With that said, this movie still has a lot of the same charm and character we're used to from the series, and it still has a lot of important and notable elements that we see in later Muppet projects as well. I think what makes this movie not as endearing as other Muppet projects is that this movie plays it a little bit more safe and straightforward compared to other Muppet movies. The plot of this movie deals with the Muppets graduating from college and fulfill their dreams by going to New York and performing in a Broadway show, only for them to separate their ways due to financial troubles. Kermit is still determined to make it big for them in the showboaty, funny way we're used to from the Muppets. What's odd about this movie is that this is playing as this is almost the real version of the Muppet story, which one, we already got, and second, I get that the Muppets isn't really a continuity conscious franchise, but more than any other Muppet movie, this tends to act like none of the other major stuff happened. It's odd that they haven't gotten this attention until now. Not just because of previous Muppet stories that say otherwise, but I don't really believe that all these years, a school with a frog, bear, and pig, and whatever, putting on extravagant musical shows have been completely unnoticed by the general public till they go to New York. It doesn't quite have the clever self-awareness that other Muppet movies have. Instead of indulging in the fact that it's ridiculous, this movie takes things a bit more seriously. I wouldn't mind so much because there are plenty of moments that are heartfelt and great in their own right here, but it doesn't balance things as well with its humor. It's not as funny and not as crazy as we come to expect. Plus, this movie feels the most of its time out of all the Muppet movies, with a soundtrack that's more 80s and a lot more trends we see in 80s films, including an advertisement for Muppet Babies, with one musical number just there to see the Muppets as cutesy babies. Oh well, at least the song is memorable, and we got a decent show out of it. And at least they emphasize in this movie that the Muppet Babies are more of a what-if scenario than actual canon, unlike other Baby 5 versions of shows. Though, I can't dislike this movie despite its flaws. There's still a lot of excellent Muppet moments here. We get at least a little bit of most of the iconic Muppets here, and they still feel like their true Muppet selves. Except for the part where Kermit gets amnesia for like the last third of the movie, which added an arguably unneeded conflict, though it's not a killer because it does lead to one of the most notable endings in Muppet history. How can you not forget this massive wedding scene? And better yet, how can you not remember the songs in this movie? Songs like Together Again, Saying Goodbye, I'll Always Love You, and honestly, Right Where I Belong is one of the most underrated tunes in Muppet history in my opinion. It's not the best Muppet soundtrack, but the songs are still catchy and heightens the enjoyment of this movie easily. Muppets Take Manhattan isn't a definitive Muppet experience, though it still gives you what you're looking for, and so much more. Nothing is too wrong with this movie, as The Muppets Take Manhattan is right where it belongs on this list. In my eyes, at least.
And now, Pigs in Space!
The last major Muppet movie to have come out prior to their hiatus. Muppets from Space ended up being a little bit better than I initially expected it was going to be on rewatch. In some capacity, it has been stated as the worst Muppet movie, and it's probably because this is the Muppet movie that didn't make as much of an impact, being not as well received critically, and also a box office flop. The nostalgia game is strong for this one, as this is one of the earliest and main Muppet movie I remember seeing in the theater. I was thinking it was going to be worse than I remember, but there's a lot of charm to Muppets from Space. It is still one of the weaker Muppet movies, granted, and that's mostly due to some dated jokes and it not being as meta or zany as some of the other. Yet, this movie does feel very unique compared to other Muppet movies, as this has a more laid-back attitude when it comes to treating its Muppet characters. In fact, I always love the fact that the main protagonist in this movie is Gonzo, and you get a bit more about what he's all about. He's one of my favorite Muppets, and I'm glad to see him get the spotlight. But there is also a double-edged sword to this, as I can also see being a Gonzo-centric movie as a negative, particularly with the fact that one of the appeals of Gonzo as a character is the fact that we don't know exactly what he is. It's also kind of the joke, too. Gonzo's not a character who has a set species. He's kind of like one of those characters like Rayman or Chowder, where he's supposed to be a whatever, not a set species that's real or fictional. So kind of simplifying it by saying, oh, Gonzo's an alien, does seem to belittle his character's appeal. Yet, Gonzo's personality is still intact, and the film does a decent job of making us get why Gonzo wants to know more about himself. I also really love the setting and style of this movie, as the Muppets are in a more contemporary setting and they don't have real shenanigans, just more vibing. In fact, the best scene in the whole movie is arguably the opening, where we get to see all the Muppets get ready for the day, set to the song Brick House. Speaking of which, this is the only Muppet movie that's not really a musical, so that's another aspect to why it might be considered the weakest Muppet movie. Even the one song performance in this movie is still a licensed song, yet despite that, I still really dig the soundtrack and all the song choices they have here. They have a lot of older classic songs from like the 70s, and they work really well on their own, but more importantly, they do a good job of making the music fit well with the scenes, making it a soundtrack that complements what's on screen instead of being just there for the sake of it. Oh, and in regards to comedy, it's still pretty funny. Doesn't have as many strong laughs as other Muppet movies, but there are some good moments with the Muppets. Even the villain, played by disappointingly no-touching, not-okay Jeffrey Tambor, still manages to get a few good laughs. This movie has some weird and off-kilter jokes at points, but it still manages to work to a good extent. Muppets from Space is a weird standout in the Muppet franchise, but one that's honestly not too bad in the grand scheme of things. It's not the strongest by any means, but if you are a fan of these characters and haven't checked out this movie due to thinking it's not that great, check it out. It holds up better than it has any right to be. Gonzo's first and only solo outing is an enjoyable one that's laid back and chill to watch. So definitely worth your time.
Merry Christmas!
And a bah humbug to you.
So I have to be a little honest about something when it comes to the next movie. I'm admittedly not as in love with Muppets Christmas Carol as much as others are. Not to say that I think this is a bad movie. As both a Christmas movie and a Muppet movie, it works on numerous different levels, and I totally see the appeal. The first major Muppet project released post Jim Henson's death, Muppets Christmas Carol serves as a good adaptation of Charles Dickens' tale due to how it managed to retell the story in its own way, and in this case, by having Muppets. Though, I guess what makes me not as in love with this project as other Muppet movies or Christmas Carol adaptations is that I always felt like this movie could have gone all the way. My favorite Christmas Carol version of all time is Mickey's Christmas Carol. Namely for how it went all out by having an entire Disney cast play every single role perfectly. They don't really do that in this movie, as only a few iconic Muppets are casted in key roles, with Kermit and Piggy playing as the Cratchits, and Fozzie playing, well, who else? Fozziewig. As someone who loves seeing iconic characters play as other characters in this story, I always felt like it could have been more in that regard. Instead, we get most of the key characters like Scrooge being played by human actors like Michael Caine, who, to his credit, does a really good job as this character, even if I have enjoyed other versions of Scrooge a little bit more. Though I say a bigger missed opportunity was not having their own Muppets fulfill the roles as the Ghost of Christmas, with the exception of Statler and Waldorf as the Marley Brothers. It's always neat to see other Christmas Carol using licensed properties to do that, so it's kind of disappointing here. Instead, they use their own original puppets in this, and it gets some mixed results. The Ghost of Christmas Past in this, I do like the concept with her being more like a child compared to the other adaptations of Christmas Carol, but the puppet does go into this weird, uncanny valley territory. Something about a Muppet that has more of a human-like face to them just looks a bit off and unsettling to look at. The Ghost of Christmas Future doesn't really do a whole lot here outside of looking menacing for being a pretty big puppet. Still an impressive puppet for its size, but I felt like other versions of this ghost were a lot creepier and more effective. However, the Ghost of Christmas Present in this, I think might just be one of the best adaptations of this character, if not the best. Not only is he a well-designed human-sized puppet, but I always love the joy this character had every second he's on screen. And that comes across really well thanks to Jerry Nelson's wonderful performance.
Did I tell you that I am the Ghost of Christmas Present?
You did, yeah.
He definitely adds a lot of heart to this movie, as his version of his departure is easily the saddest version of this character leaving I've seen in a Carol adaptation. Oh, and he also may have the best song in the entire movie too, with It Feels Like Christmas. Speaking of which, getting on to the good stuff this movie has, the songs really help stand this movie out as a good Christmas Carol adaptation, as every song fits really well for the story and has that cheery holiday mood, with not just Feels Like Christmas, but Kermit also having a really nice Christmas tune as well. And even though I wish there were more Muppets taking on the Carol roles, the roles they do offer for the Muppets are perfect, with Kermit being a great Bob Cratchit, and is even nicely voiced by Steve Whitmire for the first time. Though the real highlight of this movie for me are both Gonzo as Charles Dickens and Rizzo as himself, who are both serving as the narrator for this adaptation. They were used a lot in the 90s for most Muppet-related projects, and I can see why, because they're a great dynamic. They both have some of the best jokes in the movie, they do a great job at introducing newcomers to the story, and also just play off of one another really well.
Oh, jelly bean? I had him in my pocket all along. What?
For me, they help make this version instantly more rewatchable. So despite a few missed opportunities for me, I still highly appreciate The Muppets Christmas Carol, and can't deny its status of being a Christmas classic. It totally deserves it, and it is one that I find myself watching pretty often during the holiday season. Though, I do recommend Mickey's Christmas Carol slightly more in terms of Carol adaptation. And if you want maybe a better Christmas project featuring the Muppets, Muppets Family Christmas. It's no contest. This special has both Fraggle Rock and the Sesame Street characters appearing alongside the Muppets. You can't top that. You can't top that at all.
It's Treasure Planet.
That's Treasure Planet.
Now, between the two 90s Muppet book adaptation, Treasure Island is the better movie in my opinion. It retells the story of Treasure Island, but compared to Christmas Carol, it does a better job utilizing the Muppet name here. There are more roles in the story that are filled by Muppet characters, and while it does manage to be a decent retelling of Treasure Island on its own, it has more of that Muppet zaniness to it. And even as a Muppet movie, it manages to be a bigger and grander movie than what you think it would be. This feels like a classic swashbuckling action adventure with just the Muppets involved. So to see them in a movie of this caliber is pretty neat. As an adaptation of Treasure Island though, it still works fairly well, giving all the beats of the original with us getting to know Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver's dynamic fairly well. This is mostly due to Tim Curry being fantastic as the character. He relishes in a lot of the over-the-top nature this version of the story has, so he fits perfectly. Though there have been admittedly stronger versions of this dynamic, and this is mostly due to the fact that it most emphasizes on being a Muppet version than an authentic one. Plus, I don't want to be mean, but the kid who plays Jim does have a bit of an odd singing voice. I don't know, something just sounds off about it. It just sounds a little weird to me. I'm hoping this guy went on to do bigger and better things, so let me see. I'm gonna Google it real quick. Huh, they're now the current voice of 2D from Gorillaz. Who knew? Although, while on the topic of music, the soundtrack is another aspect that makes this movie so memorable. The score, done by the incredible Hans Zimmer, helps add to the large scale this movie tries to have. And like Christmas Carol, the songs are also great, being catchy and also fitting for this movie. The highlights of this soundtrack easily goes to the opening song, which sets up the movie very well as being not your typical Muppet movie, sounding a lot more ominous and darker than any other Muppet song out there.
And when we sail the sea, you can bet your boots there'll be treachery.
And the other highlight song being
We got cabin fever.
Cabin Fever, for being the craziest and zaniest moment in the entire movie that fits absolutely perfectly with the Muppets' wacky antics. So overall, Muppets Treasure Island is quite great. It's full of energy, it's a decent retelling of Treasure Island. Even if Treasure Planet might be a better retelling of the story from Disney in my opinion, the Muppets trip to Treasure Island is still a fun-filled trip that is totally worth your time. What else can you say but
Cabin fever.
Hey, Polly. What? What was that song that just happened?
What are you talking about?
You know, cabin fever. That.